Alright, so today I'm once again circling back to Cyberpunk 2077, but this time it's to discuss refund metrics and take a deeper look at the actual sales numbers now that the dust has slightly begun to settle. Before going any further, credit where credit is due. I got this idea from another creator named Last Known Meal, who primarily focuses on Cyberpunk content, I believe, and I'll link his channel down below in the description. He does excellent work, but I felt it was well worth doing my own video because A, I could gather additional data to refine the picture, B, I wanted to check if there was any major anomalies present between his and my own findings, and C, we've gotten plenty of news from both CDPR and mainstream media about how impressive the sales figures are for the game, despite refunds, but I've not seen anyone discuss just how many copies actually got returned. Now, before getting started, there are a few things to explain because there are some issues here that make the data less than precise. First, the whole thing is based on YouTube community polling, which is anonymous online feedback and really can't be taken as a precise measurement. Ballpark, yes, absolutely. Exact, not really a chance of that, so keep that in mind. Second, I made a relatively amateur mistake on this poll, which thinking back was glaringly obvious at the time, and that mistake probably skewed the results slightly at least, but I went ahead anyways because that mistake, most likely, skewed all responses in a somewhat proportionate way, thus not really disrupting the data to any significant degree. And third, since we are dealing with figures in the millions, I will round down whenever possible instead of up, and I will also avoid stating overly specific numbers like 13,322,945, etc., because it would not only be time consuming, but also entirely useless. Without further ado, let's get started. The framework is pretty simple. Myself and Last Known Meal submitted a simple community poll which asked, did you refund Cyberpunk 2077? The construction of these polls was slightly different, intentionally on my part, so that I could gauge whether or not there was any meaningful audience discrepancy that might skew the results. Last Known Meal has balanced and measured coverage of this game. I wouldn't expect that his audience has any sort of notable animosity towards the title, not at all, so his figures probably present a good baseline from a community that is enthusiastic about the game or the title. And my own coverage, despite what many would say, has been somewhat balanced as well. I've certainly strayed into the realm of harsher criticism than many other creators at various intervals, but I also took a pretty hardline stance in favor of the game's underlying brilliance from a narrative and storytelling perspective especially. I wouldn't consider myself one of the creators who actively tried to push people away from the title, definitely not, but I also made sure to adequately warn them of whatever shortcomings I could personally see in the immediate days after launch. With those factors considered, let's look at the data. The term data here is very loosely applied. Take it with a grain of salt, please. The poll came back with about 26,000 votes, and the options were as follows. Did you refund? Yes, console. No, console. Yes for PC. No for PC. In hindsight, my error, this is pretty important, was not putting a fifth option, which said none of the above or I didn't purchase, because viewers who see the poll in their feed, which was targeted precisely through keywords at the Cyberpunk 2077 audience, cannot actually see the results of the poll without voting in it. So anyone who isn't a Cyberpunk player, be it past or present, whatever the case may be, who wanted to see the results had to vote on one of the options. Anyways, the results found that 11% of voters self-identified as a console user and selected yes, while 31% selected no. 6% identified as a PC user who did refund, and 52% did not. So what do we make of this? Well, right off the bat, there is a number of different ways to interpret these figures. On the one hand, simple addition would indicate that 17%, by these metrics, of the active Cyberpunk 2077 user base who browse YouTube and came in contact as well with this poll, refunded the game. However, another way to examine this would be to focus on proportions. If you isolate the console population here, it would seem that over 1/3 of the active voting members who purchased the game on console and came in contact with this poll refunded it, versus a little over 1/10 of the active PC population. That tracks pretty well and makes a lot of sense from a ratio perspective because the issues weren't nearly as bad on moderate to high-powered gaming PCs as they were on console. And I doubt there were all that many people buying this game on like a 7-year-old laptop with any realistic expectation that it would run well in the slightest. Now, I also wanted to compare this to the poll by Last Known Meal because if his results were wildly different, let's say to the tune of like 30% as a discrepancy, it would indicate that there was something horribly wrong with these metrics, either his or mine, and I shouldn't really give them any second thought. His poll had a different composition and simply had yes with 7%, actively thinking about it at 13%, and no with 80%. If we compare that to my own results, where 83% of voters stated no and 17% stated yes, also considering the fact that when I first built this entire channel, it was a console-oriented guides page for the Division, and for multiple years afterwards, I cultivated a console audience by playing and streaming every major game that came out on Xbox. So that's another factor. There's too many factors to really go through all of them. But if we compare these results, it would be close enough to make me think that as a ballpark estimate, there's probably some accuracy here. So what now? Well, the official refund metrics for Cyberpunk 2077 have not been released, obviously, but what has been released is the official sales metrics from December 20th, 2020, because it might have a fiscal impact on shareholders. That was their justification. From the official CDPR post, we can read the following. Quote, the management board of CD Projekt SA with a registered office in Warsaw, hereinafter referred to as the company, hereby announces that, based on reports obtained from digital distribution platforms and data collected from physical distributors, it estimates that by 20th of December, inclusive gamers have purchased over 13 million copies of Cyberpunk 2077. This figure represents the estimated volume of retail sales across all hardware platforms, factoring in returns, this is the important part, factoring in returns submitted by retail clients in brick and mortar as well as digital storefronts, i.e. the sell-through figure, less all refund requests emailed directly to the company by the publication date of this report in the framework of the Help Me Refund campaign, end quote. So that's pretty definitive. Side note, if it's not, they have yet another lawsuit on their hands because you can't lie to your shareholders. So what happens if we base these metrics off of that number? One catch though, since this is the total data, the total sales data for December 20th minus the refunds, what we would need to do is find what number 13 million is 83% of. It's a simple calculation. 13 million divided by 0.83. For demonstration, I used an online percentage calculator in the background, and the number we get is 15.6 million as the total sales without subtracting refunds. As I stated before, we will excessively round down for the 600,000 extra copies, and that would put us at a difference of about 15 million copies, becoming 13 million, so a difference of 2 million, after the refund wave, as of December 20th, and that's important. Now, this matters because, for starters, that's nowhere near the point where CDPR will have finished processing all refunds. This was 2 weeks ago. Or that they will somehow have ceased being filed. They're still probably being filed in certain areas by certain people. It's also nowhere near the point where the ultimate sales figures for the game will slow down or stagnate. They won't top launch day figures again for some time, probably ever, but Witcher 3 sits at something like 28 million copies sold in total, and games that improve over time continue to sell. So this number will increase. But if we look at a snapshot in time, the launch window may have seen Cyberpunk 2077 as a 15 million copy game reduced by a full 2 million copies to 13 million. This is where we run into a bit of a problem. Refund data is not a metric that companies typically give out. In fact, it's exceptionally rare to ever know how many copies of a game got returned because if that number is high, for example, it makes the publisher look kind of weak. How should we say it? Financially weak. It can have a negative impact on shareholder or investor sentiment. And generally speaking, we just don't see that kind of figure in this industry. However, one popular game, Rust, has at one point released those figures. The metrics we have available are from 2017, so it's a while ago, at which point Rust had been alive and well for over 3 years. Rust is also a very popular game. After mid-2015, it never once dropped below 10, then 20, even 30,000 average concurrent players for a 1-month span. And Cyberpunk 2077 is larger from a specific concurrent player count perspective on Steam, yes, but this refund data is after a mere 10 days of its existence. In 2017, Rust announced that they had refunded a total of 330,000 copies since launch, returning $4.4 million to the players. And if the estimations and polling data I have collected on Cyberpunk 2077 are even remotely accurate, which I would ballpark estimate they probably kind of are, the game received 6 to 7 times as many refunds in just over 1 week, compared to 3 years for Rust. Obviously, these games aren't exactly comparable. It's really just a rough estimate and kind of just a side-by-side comparison of things that it's apples to oranges, but they're both fruit, okay? And in the end, I stand by this. Cyberpunk 2077 will be a monumental game with a tremendous amount of content, aided by the modding community and further patches from CD Projekt Red. Like, there is accountability here. It will become amazing. But when all the news I see focuses on the number 13 million copies sold, I wanted to see if I could dig into how many copies got refunded. Here's the thing though, this is fun to analyze, but something should be made very clear. A lot of people who refunded the game might very well purchase it again at a later date. when the issues have been fixed or there's been significant patches. Someone who is unable to play the game in any realistically acceptable condition on, for example, a PlayStation 4 might get a PlayStation 5 in 2021, and at that point they may circle back willingly, even enthusiastically, to dive into the world of Night City once again. Refunds are not necessarily, in this particular case, lost customers. They might actually represent a significant chunk of players who are just placing this title on somewhat of a back burner and will eventually play it. The purpose of this video is not to hyperbolically claim the game is dead like certain gaming press outlets have done now that the player base has fallen something like 79% since launch. It's actually like 90 something now easily, but yeah, shocker. Single player game with a finite amount of content gets played through by the players who then wait for more content and aren't playing it. So unheard of. Much wow, very much. But yeah, the purpose is not to say the game is dead or the end is nigh. It's to showcase that the launch day disaster, the launch week disaster, I should say, despite what many fans will widely proclaim and scream at you as being overblown and exaggerated, really was a big deal. And it was backed up by fiscal decisions because a refund metric in the millions of copies means tens and tens of millions being translated to revenue. Again, a lot of this is based on mere estimations, and at the end of the day, it was an anonymous internet poll, so really, who actually knows? But I'm fairly confident that as a ballpark, like a really rough ballpark estimate, this figure should be somewhat correct, and it was fun to get that feedback and see what I could find. But that's it. If you want support, please check out Odyssey. It's linked down below in the description. It's a YouTube platform alternative that is very rewarding for its creators. So you can click that link, sign up, register your email, and start surfing there like you would on YouTube, and it's much more rewarding for any creators that you choose to watch. You can support on Locals for $5 or $10 a month. It's basically Patreon, but better if you want. There's merch discounts there. I upload ad-free videos and audio podcast versions of all the content as well on that platform. And there's also another YouTuber to check out and a whole bunch of other stuff too. But I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.